This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell extra is going on?
Well, what the hell is going on is it's the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attacks, and it's an incredibly sad day, but it's also a day that we look back on a year that is quite incredible for Israel, unprecedented in its history in terms of how it absorbed the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, and how it has turned around, and despite a wave of anti-Semitic pressure from the entire world, has just taken a hammer to these people. and it is, I think, Bibi went, we can talk about this a little bit later because we're going to read your excellent piece in the Substack, but Bibi went from being the guy who presided over the worst intelligence failure in Israeli history and one of the worst intelligence failures in Western history, to a guy who presided over some of the greatest intelligence and counterterrorism successes of any nation in the West in the history. It's a comeback, not just for him personally, but for Israel to have turned around after a year of where they were a year ago today and where they are now. It's inspiring in so many ways.
Well, it is inspiring, but, I think, look, for me, the place you start is there are still hostages being held in Gaza. A lot of reports suggest that only 20 of them are still alive. I hope that's wrong. I hope that's not true. I'm not quite sure how a 9-month-old baby who was kidnapped survives for a year under these sort of conditions, but they're the first things to think about. There are still 4 Americans alive that are being held. Not that you would know that from this administration. Yep. Not that you would know that from their efforts. And reporting suggests that Yahya Sinwar, who is the still living leader of Hamas, has surrounded himself with at least 20 living hostages, so that if the Israelis find him and hit him, as they did Hassan Nasrallah, Nasrallah's successor, that in fact that would take out all the hostages. The most cynical, the most evil of groups of people that we've seen in many years. And I think we've learned a lot in the last year, too. I mean, Israel has turned things around in many ways, but we've learned a lot about how people feel about Israel. We've learned a lot about how people feel about Jews. We've learned a lot of things that I guess we wouldn't have known if this hadn't happened.
Yeah, I had no idea how much hatred of Jews there was around us. I think, I was listening to Dan Senor today talking on America's Newsroom about how he had a year ago he had taken his kids to Auschwitz, and then he took them to the site of the Nova Music Festival, and how one of his kids told him that the Nova site was more shocking for him because he would look at Auschwitz and say, well, that happened in a different generation, and we've come a long way since then. But to see this having just happened in his lifetime was even more disturbing than seeing the historic remnants of the Holocaust that happened almost a century ago. And so this is happening in our lifetime. We all sort of think, we all look around ourselves at the modern world and say, well, we've come such a long way since those days, right? We're much more tolerant now than we were, and we're much more united, and we're much more civilized. And you know what? In the 1930s, people thought the same thing. They really did. So in The World Crisis, Churchill wrote, "War is too foolish, too fantastic to be thought of in the 20th century. Civilization has climbed above such perils. The interdependence of nations in trade and traffic, the sense of law, the Hague Convention, liberal principles, high finance, common sense have rendered such nightmares impossible." And then he asked, "Are you quite sure? It would be a pity to be wrong." And they were wrong, and it was more than a pity. But we feel the same way today. People think we couldn't have World War III today. That seems too foolish or fantastical. Well, guess what? We've got wars raging on 2 continents and could be one on the 3rd very soon. A lot can go wrong. So, the idea that this is just a blip on the screen is just absolutely inaccurate. We could be on the precipice of something far worse than what we've seen in the last year.
No, we could. Listen, all of this has taken place with the backdrop of Iran's quest for nuclear weapons. What happens if this happens and Iran has nuclear weapons? I do not want to place my trust in this regime in Iran not to use them because I don't think they think the way we do. I don't think we understand their calculus. I don't think as much as we pretend that we have a bead on how the government in Iran and Tehran is thinking about us and about Israel, that we pretend we know what it is, and I don't think we know anything about it. Just as we didn't know anything about October 7th,
Nope,
like the Israelis.
That's exactly right. But I will tell you the big difference today, which is what inspires me and which is why I stand with Israel taking whatever actions it feels necessary to defend itself, is that in the 1930s, Jews were dependent on other people for their security. Jews were dependent on the hope that the Americans would let USS St. Louis land and provide refuge for the Jews, that the world would come to their aid and protect them and defend them. And the Jews have learned a lesson, which is we can't depend on other people because other people hate us or are either hate us or are indifferent to us, and that we need to be able to defend ourselves. And guess what? Israel is one of the most powerful military forces on the face of the earth today, and they are exercising that force with skill, with creativity, with fearlessness, and in a way that, we should be learning from.
I hope we are.
And God bless them. God bless them for standing up and defending themselves. I stand with Israel.
Same. Same.
Well, you wrote a great piece here, Danny. And so for the Substack, in our continuing series of What the Hell Did Danny Write? What the Hell Did I Write? Tell us what the hell you wrote this week.
Well, I wanted to write a piece commemorating the anniversary of this attack, and I really wanted to underscore something that you and I have both said many times, which is this isn't just about Israel, and it isn't even just about Jews, but I start with the Jews. So here it is. Theodor Herzl wrote these words in 1896. I believe that I understand anti-Semitism, which is really a highly complex movement. I consider it from a Jewish standpoint, yet without fear or hatred. I believe that I can see what elements there are in it of vulgar sport, of common trade jealousy, of inherited prejudice, of religious intolerance, and also of pretended self-defense. We have honestly, this is we the Jews, have honestly endeavored everywhere to merge ourselves in the social life of surrounding communities and to preserve the faith of our fathers. We are not permitted to do so. In vain are we loyal patriots, our loyalty in some places running to extremes. In vain do we make the same sacrifices of life and property as our fellow citizens. In vain do we strive to increase the fame of our native land in science and art, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In countries where we have lived for centuries, we are still cried down as strangers, and often by those whose ancestors were not yet domiciled in the land where Jews had already had experience of suffering." Unquote. He wrote that in 1896, but he could have written it yesterday. He could have written it in America today, or it could have been after the expulsion of Jews by Spain in 1492, or after the Papal States forced Jews into ghettos throughout their dominions. It could have been after the Nuremberg laws in 1935, or the Farhud in Iraq in 1941, or after the Holocaust, or the mass expulsion of Jews from Arab lands after 1948. Neither the recitation nor the ignorance of that history can change the facts. It is, however, a reality that the Jewish people, wherever they have lived, have faced anti-Semitism and persecution. That is why Zionism was born. That is why Israel exists. Why do I begin this way? Because the victory, and make no mistake, it really is a victory, of Hamas and its masters in Iran, like the victory of Hitler in his time, is not the murder of millions or thousands or 6 or 7. Their victory is the hordes that rise up to support the, quote, justice, unquote, of the, quote, settlement, unquote, of what is often called the Jewish question. For so many of us who have labored at the heart of American democracy, and for people like me who have devoted their professional lives to the study of the Middle East, it is not the sight of what happened on October 7th, 2023 that is so devastating, though devastating it is. It is the sight of Hamas's fellow travelers in academia, at the United Nations, in the U.S. government, across the corporate press, throughout Europe, and of course in the Middle East itself that is so terribly dispiriting. Brett Stevens at the New York Times has done a beautiful job, and we hyperlink it in the Substack, has done a beautiful job cataloging the explosion of anti-Semitism over the last year, and I can't do better than he did. In the 366 days since October 7th, Mark and I have spent days and weeks writing and talking about the corrosion of American society by critical race theory, by the neo-segregationism at the heart of the DEI movement, about the scourges of anti-Semitism in both the Democratic and Republican parties, and about the progress of Israel's war against Iran's proxies. We've talked about Iran, about Hamas, about Hezbollah, and about Israel itself, and about the Jewish community. I hope this work has helped illuminate the challenge that faces us. And why do I say us? Because the hatreds that animate Iran, that underpin each bombing, each murder, rape, each missile launch, only begin with the Jews. Sure, we can dismiss the useful idiots at the heart of campus protests and the anti-Semitism that animates too much of the media, and even the stupidity of members of Congress and their musings on Jewish space lasers. But we cannot dismiss the ideology that unifies the far left and the far right, that walks hand in hand with the Islamist extremism of Iran and its Sunni acolytes. And we must fight it. Here's how. At home, we need to reject tribalism. Mark and I talk about this all the time. The intersectionality insanity that infuses too much of Gen Z and the ridiculous professoriate that has corrupted them insists that if you're pro-choice, you must be pro-trans, anti-capitalism, anti-white, anti-Israel. This groupthink is a scourge and must be rejected in all of its forms. There are Democrats who are smart about Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Israel. There are Republicans who are the same. As an example, it doesn't matter that Richie Torres is pro-choice or that Lindsey Graham is pro-life. Together, they need to lean on Chuck Schumer and Mike Johnson to do more to fight Iran, support Israel, and defeat anti-Semitism. It doesn't sully their credentials on other issues to work together. This is something so missing from Washington today. We need to change the law. We need to pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that Chuck Schumer is sitting on, and together build the foundation to crush Iran and its allies in America. We need to change tax law to out the terrorist supporters hiding behind nonprofit umbrella groups, using both American and foreign money to foster extremism and anti-Semitism on campus. We need to double down on Iran sanctions and return Iran to the economic extremists it faced under Trump. Speak out. For too long, Jews have sought to fade into the woodwork, hoping that by diminishing their own identities or elevating other issues, people would forget the hatred of Jews that plagues every century. Screw that. And that's all caps.
Amen.
Whether you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or anything else, silence, as the haters like to say, is complicity. It can be the anti-Semitism you see at your school, the Jew hatred you see in your company, the unequal treatment you see in your community. Whatever it is, wherever it is, call it out. Never explain it away. Educate your children. Educate your friends. Don't wait for people to commit evil before summoning that within yourself that is righteous. Defeat the enemy. I wrote about this last week, but I can't say it often enough. It's long past time to remove the Rashida Tlaibs, the Louis Farrakhan's, the Ta-Nehisi Coates, and the Tucker Carlsons and Laura Loomers from our political lives in America.
Hear, hear.
Our tolerance for their hatred must end, and I know there will be costs to shoving aside such types. It's worth the price. Speak out, and remember, we are the majority. Learn the law. No, the First Amendment doesn't give you the right to shout down your adversaries, nor to deplatform people with whom you disagree. The First Amendment doesn't permit you to call for other people to die, let alone do them physical harm. That's not how our Constitution works. Learn about it, share about it, demand that our schools teach it. And abroad, Iran, the government of the Islamic Republic must be stopped. and its ability to export weapons, support terrorism, and develop nuclear bombs stymied. Israel has shown us just how weak and hollow the regime in Tehran really is. It's long past time for the United States to consider whether the existence of the Islamic Republic's system in Iran is tolerable for our own national security. This doesn't necessarily mean war, but it does mean a change in our national policy of tolerance and cooperation with the regime. Iran's collaborators, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, not to speak of the West Bank and Gaza, are en route to destruction because of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But it's not enough to remove the poison from these vassal states. The United States must do more to help good people stand against their aggressors in Tehran. We've looked away for decades as hundreds of thousands of people have died needlessly at the hands of the Iranians and their henchmen. We need a proactive and competitive policy to edge out the Iranians in favor of people who are more inclined to the values we support. If that means gutting the Department of State and AID, so be it. Congress, this is your job. The Palestinians. The failure of Western paternalism in the West Bank and Gaza has fostered the growth of a terrorist rump state that kills children, exploits women, fosters Islamist extremism, and denies Palestinians a hope for their future. The future of, quote, Palestine does not rest on Benjamin Netanyahu. It rests on the United States and European nations that have wasted hundreds of billions of dollars towards no good end. There needs to first be an accounting of the mistakes of the last 30 years since Oslo and an understanding of what will be necessary for a state of Palestine to exist that neither threatens Israel nor the United States. On Israel, it's simple. There are still 4 American hostages in Gaza, not that you would know it. Give Israel what it needs to defeat our shared enemies and bring the hostages home. And last, America. For some years now, we have had leaders who have lacked any vision for a world led by the United States. One made retreat his signature, another made burden sharing the be-all and end-all. We don't need to be everywhere, and we can't solve every problem. Then again, we've learned time and again how problems fester when we ignore them or pretend they are solved by pieces of paper. Once upon a time, the United States celebrated our values and knew that if we did not compete against our enemies, they would win with disastrous consequences to ourselves. Think of it as a selfish foreign policy, or think of it as a values-driven policy, or think of it as the only foreign policy that will keep America safe and prosperous. What does that mean? It means arming our friends that want to fight for themselves to the hilt if needed. It means building up our deterrence and our military and remaining on the cutting edge. It means recognizing there are regimes that are anathema to our interest, and that allowing them to arm themselves with nuclear weapons is insane. Over the last 4 years, we have failed Ukraine and we have failed Israel. We are only lucky they have enough fight in them to continue even as we slow roll the arms necessary to win the fight. We have serious choices before us in the coming weeks. Think not just about crime, immigration, and abortion. Think about the future of the free world.
That is awesome, Danny. But you left out one category, which we talked
What?
about a little bit the other week, the United
Tell me,
Nations.
add it.
The United Nations.
You are so right. How did I leave that out?
Yep. We should cut that thing off the pier and send it off into the... It has completely discredited itself as an institution in this whole conflict, right?
Yes. No, you're totally right, and I should have added it.
A vile rat's den of anti-Semites that gives platform to all the awful regimes that you just cited. They use the United Nations as a tool to beat up on Israel, to beat up on America, to beat up on the world's free nations. And it is just, we should just stop spending money on this. This thing is over. Get rid of it.
It should be over. You're completely right. And, I have come around to this view and now have the zeal of the converted. We cannot tolerate the idea of subsidizing these people with American taxpayer money. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars that are pouring forth from our treasury to the worst of the worst. And, I recognize that the American people don't wake up in the morning and think, what the hell is going on at the United Nations? They think about things that are near and dear to their hearts, and crime, immigration, inflation, those are things that are important to them. But if they knew how much of their hard-won spending money was going off to these enemies of everything that is right and decent in the world, they would be horrified.
Well, we keep hearing this week with these horrible floods in Georgia and South Carolina, and the Biden administration has given them, $750 a head, for support. And people are saying, well, we got money for Ukraine and we've got money for all these other things, but we don't have money to take care of people in North Carolina and Georgia. It's like, well, you know what? I got a way to fund it. Let's get rid of the friggin' United Nations. All the money we're giving them. let's defund UNRWA and give that money to North Carolina and Georgia. If we want to get into this game of foreign aid versus helping American citizens, there's no better pot of money than the United Nations system and how much money we give it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it ought to be kicked out of New York, go off, be headquartered in Lagos or Cairo or whatever place you guys all feel comfortable. The U.S. will diminish its donations. This is a job, just like I said, though, this is a job for our Congress. And I know that there are people who are working their butts off to try to get accountability from the United Nations, to try to get audits, to try to figure out what they're doing. But at the end of the day, it is always a protected institution, even under the Trump administration. And that is because we are on autopilot. This is what I've said about all of these things. It's not that I don't want a Palestinian state. It's that I don't want a Palestinian state that looks like Gaza, right? And if we are so disqualified, or the West Bank, we have so disqualified ourselves. We have spent tens of billions, hundreds of billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars building up the Palestinian Authority, building up the Palestinian government, and helping with security, education, projects, this, that, and the other thing. And what do we have to show for it?
A lot of rocket launchers.
Yeah, no kidding.
Seriously, we gave them pipes for a water system in Gaza, and they took the pipes and turned them into rocket launchers. I mean, literally taking humanitarian aid and turning them into weapons of war. This you cannot. First of all, number one, all talk of a Palestinian state should cease until further notice, because the idea that October 7th would bring them any closer to a Palestinian state is the worst set of incentives and lessons you could send the world. Putting aside whether you won't think a Palestinian state is viable or not, the idea that you would reward the Palestinian radicals and terrorists for October 7th by talking about a Palestinian state is absurd. But we need to, the only way you can ever have a Palestinian state someday in the distant future is if we destroy Hamas, we destroy Fatah, we destroy Hezbollah, we destroy all these radicals, and we go through a process of what we should have done in Germany more vigorously, which was denazification. We need a de-Hamasification of the Palestinian people, because they have been indoctrinated. And I know there were some polls that came out that showed that that Hamas had actually been lying about the polling numbers, about their support, about the support of Gazans for Hamas. But it wasn't insignificant even with the real numbers. And, a lot of that is probably as a result of the fact that what has accrued to them as a result of Hamas's miscalculation in terms of going of October 7th. They don't like the results. There's indoctrination going on for decades, hatred of Jews that has been inculcated in a generation of people. And until you de-Hamasify them of this ideology, there is no way you can ever have two states living side by side in peace, as the phrase says. It's never going to happen until the only way we were able to do it in Germany is because the threat of without the massive denazification was because of the threat of the Cold War, that there was a greater danger outside that faced them. So I think this all talk of a Palestinian state should be put on hold for a very long time.
But first of all, I agree with that, because I think the idea that at the end of the road of October 7th, a Palestinian state lies like it was a rainbow is absolutely outrageous. But the second point is, how can we begin to talk about helping to build a Palestinian state, helping to underwrite a Palestinian state, for as long as we don't look at where it was we went wrong?
Yep.
I mean, I understand, okay, the Israelis are going to have an October 7th commission. They're going to figure out who's to blame. They're going to figure out what they did wrong. They're going to figure out how to fix it, and that's all to the good. We did that after 9/11, although we were substantially less honest with ourselves about that, about things than we needed to be. But absent an understanding of what it is that we did wrong, we and the Europeans did wrong, I don't understand how it is that we can even have the pretense of wanting to underwrite a Palestinian state. Look at what we've built. Damn. With our taxpayer money. And this is really, this sort of accountability. Congress has gotten very much in the habit of talking about oversight and having investigators, but their investigators are all political. Their investigators are seeing what it was that Hunter did with his laptop and what it was that Donald Trump did with his bimbos. And I got to tell you, okay, that's fine if that's how you want to do what you need to do. But I want you to actually go and look at what you, Congress, wrote checks for year in, year out, and what the people you gave those checks to at the Department of State and AID did with that money. Because how is it that we have ended up paying for a terrorist state?
Well, how is it that the leaders of Hamas are billionaires?
Well, we know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Right, and still today,
Did they
build
build productive businesses that have changed the world, like Elon Musk or that? No, they did not. It's all aid money.
Right,
It's all aid money. Stolen aid money.
Nope, that's exactly right.
We made them billionaires.
Right.
You, the taxpayer, have made Hamas rich. It's your money. Your money. While you're digging out of the muck in North Carolina and pulling what's left of your home out of the ruins of a flood, your tax dollars have made the leaders of Hamas billionaires. That's what's happened. And so rather than make them billionaires, here's an idea. Let's kill them all.
Mark, ruthless. Yeah, listen.
Can I just go through the litany of some of Israel's accomplishments in the last year? Because I think Axios pulled together a great list.
Absolutely.
So this is in mid-July, Israeli Defense Forces airstrike in southern Gaza killed Hamas's military wing leader Mohammed Deif. It's the first time since the beginning of the war that Israel managed to kill one of the masterminds of the October 7th attacks. Then they carried out the longest-range strike in Israel's history that set oil facilities in Yemen ablaze. Then they killed Hezbollah's top military commander, Fouad Shakur, in an airstrike in Beirut. A day later, they assassinated, I don't use the word assassination, I don't know why they do. It's not an assassination, it's a legitimate military target. They took out Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, in an Iranian government guest house in Tehran after he had just met with the Ayatollah Khamenei, which is why the Ayatollah Khamenei is looking at the sky every time he does an event outdoors. 2 months later, they launched a clandestine attack on Hezbollah, detonating thousands of pagers and walkie-talkie, left thousands of Hezbollah members dead and wounded. Unprecedented strikes over the next few weeks have destroyed 2/3 of Hezbollah's rocket and missile arsenals and killed its entire leadership and the people who then got elected after that to take over. The attacks reached the height with the killing of Hassan Nasrallah and his senior deputies, and then Israel just defeated a massive Iranian missile attack. And can I just, so that's just a litany, that's just the highlights. There's a lot more detail that's gone on since then. But also, can I just say, if you want evidence of the fecklessness and the weakness of the American administration, correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, but until this administration, Israel had never directly attacked, Iran had never directly attacked Israel. It was always through proxies. We've crossed. That's a huge line that's been crossed.
No, they'd never launched a direct attack on Israel.
So that is a huge red line that's been crossed. We're now twice under this administration. Iran has directly attacked Israel.
We did help. We did help Israel repel those attacks both times. The Biden administration did, including, Mark, I don't know if you've noticed, most recently with the presence of the USS Cole in the Mediterranean.
There you go. That's a great statement.
It is a great statement, and kudos that the military sent that out with a big FU to the terrorists, because they're all, these are all terrorists. Look, we need to write the narrative. We need to educate our policymakers, and we need to do exactly as the Israelis have done for us and learn that the cost of killing Americans and kidnapping Americans is a very high one indeed. The fact that we have not done that and that we have allowed others to do that is shame on us.
Those are the positive of the last year. What breaks my heart is to look at these college campuses today and see American kids marching chanting slogans they don't understand, or worse, sometimes do, and spewing this anti-Semitism and supporting an attack that was an attack on their fellow young people at a music festival. I mean, this all started with a bunch of kids who were just listening to EDM music in the desert and had gathered peacefully to be kids. And how any 18 to 22-year-old kid in America could not look at those events and their hearts go directly to those kids instead of to the terrorists who carried that out is one of the most shocking revelations of the state of our educational system, the state of our culture, the state of parenting in this country. I mean, it is a shame on America that's happened. And, you know, I every time I see one of these tweets with a picture of one of these beautiful kids, I send it to my kids and I just send a note saying, your age. Your age. Kid, your age. Could have been your friend. Could it, if you, in different circumstances, is somebody you might have hung out with and gotten to know and liked and been one of your friends. It's just absolutely heartbreaking.
It is.
To watch.
It is heartbreaking to watch, and that's our job, to educate people, to make people better, and to help the Israelis and to help us win, because that's what we need. That's what we need.
Kill them all, stand with the victims, and then we can figure out what to do once the dust settles.
Amen to that. Amen to that bloodthirsty thought. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, for all the support.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you for writing such a beautiful piece.
Thank you all for being with us.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.